Drew's got that Joaquin Phoenix mustache thing going.
All right, welcome to episode 76 of Farm to Markets, a show where participants only get 5 minutes to state their opinions and the person with the most time at the end wins, but there are no prizes. Today we are talking about the protests in Israel, where financial risk is at, Amazon's Palm payment system, the Robusta coffee bean, and if Blockbuster is making a comeback. So in Israel, huge weekly protests have been held by people opposed to the government's reform plans because they believe they are anti-democratic. The key elements of Netanyahu's reform plans are to allow Parliament the ability to overrule the Supreme Court with a simple majority and to allow Parliament to appoint justices instead of the Supreme Court. Proponents of the reform consider the Supreme Court to be a left-leaning institution in the hands of unelected elite and say attempts to stop it from making the judiciary more accountable are undemocratic. Netanyahu's opponents say the reforms will severely undermine the country's democracy by weakening the judicial system, which historically has kept a check on the government's use of its power. Whose position do you think is more democratic?
Well, democracy is kind of a nebulous term going back, 2,500 plus years, but more or less the way it's understood is defined as the people, either directly or through immediate representatives, making laws and enacting policies for a particular country. So to me, whether you think it's good policy or not, the concept of an independent judiciary that's not really accountable to elected officials or to the people is less democratic. I would argue that, again, whether or not you like the policy or think that getting rid of an unaccountable judiciary that can overrule elected officials is good or bad, forcing those institutions to bend to the will of the population through their elected representatives in a government seems to be the more democratic position to me. It's important, I guess, to note that Israel is more of a democracy, quote unquote, than like the United States would be. It doesn't actually have a constitution at all, similar to like countries like the UK. So things like freedom of speech, freedom of the press, or the structure of the judiciary, none of them are actually like laid out in constitutions. They're pretty much all decided by legislatures from day one. So it's not particularly, to me, undemocratic to want to change the structure of the government if you're Israel. Again, regardless of if you think that's bad policy, I think Netanyahu's got the more democratic position, quote unquote.
I probably have more questions than I have comments on this. I spent most of my morning rebalancing portfolios and less time learning about the history and government structure of Israel. So I'm coming from a position of ignorance. I don't want to sound too ignorant, but I guess from what I've read in that article, basically it's allowing the government to operate largely without checks and balances, which I see as not democratic. I don't know how the judiciary is elected. Maybe one of you can chime in. Are they elected through votes or are they appointed?
They're essentially selected by a committee that is dominated by attorneys. So a group of elites essentially give the candidates to the president, who then makes an appointment. But and what Netanyahu is hoping for is that the legislature, like we have in our system in America, the Senate has to confirm appointments to the Supreme Court. He wants something similar in Israel. That currently doesn't exist.
So maybe one solution would just be to have the judiciary nominated or elected from the public. It seems clear that the judiciary might be too powerful right now. So I don't know. The protest, is that a good representation of the majority of Israel, or is that just one small group that doesn't like what the government's currently doing right now? Those are the questions I have. Maybe you guys can answer those for me, but in large, I guess I really don't know which position is more democratic, and I'll relinquish my time.
I'm going to go ahead and just answer Tom's question, and that is, which one is more democratic? I believe that Netanyahu's position is descriptively much more democratic than those who are opposing him. Essentially, what he's doing is he's trying to get the will of the people to actually come to fruition. It's the exact opposite of what we saw with the last two appointments to the Supreme Court, where we saw our left-leaning institutions screaming and yelling that they're going to possibly pack the courts with more Supreme Court justices to save democracy. Well, it's the exact opposite of democracy. The people voted for elected officials who represent them and got the appointments that the majority wanted. And now those who purport that democracy is at risk are really afraid of democracy. And it's exactly the same thing in Israel, is that those who are purporting that that Netanyahu's policies are a threat to democracy, in reality, it's a threat to republicanism, not democracy. Republicanism is the rule of law, and that's what currently is in place, is that, hey, these are the rules, this is the way we do it, this is the status quo, and Netanyahu is proposing that we allow the will of the people to actually happen. So to Tom's point, is that Netanyahu's reforms are certainly more democratic than his opposition would suggest.
Man, I'm gonna. You can call me a fence sitter on this one, because when I read both plans, I like the idea that Parliament gets to elect Supreme Court justices, because then at least you have elected officials electing Supreme Court justices. I don't like the fact that the Supreme Court in Israel just, basically unelected officials appoint another unelected official to replace them. I don't like that, but I also don't like the fact that the parliament can just overrule the Supreme Court with a simple majority. It seems a little bit too easy to me. So I feel like, I don't want to be like Mr. Fence Sitter here, but I feel like the solution is going to be closer to the middle of both of these both of these ideas here. If they could basically just slim it down to, Parliament gets to appoint Supreme Court justices and then leave it at that and have it more like the American system, I think that, in my mind, that would be better, at least in my mind. Maybe it's just because I live in America, that's what I'm used to. But, when they say they can Parliament can overturn it with simple majority, or we're just going to have Supreme Court justices elect other Supreme Court justices, none of whom are elected representatives, both of those seem a little, unpleasant to me. So I'm going to kind of sit the fence on this one. All right, so number two. So the Wall Street Journal thinks that the biggest financial risk today lie with insured bank deposits, commercial real estate, and shadow banking, which is basically private equity firms that raise cash and make risky bets on companies and real estate. Do you agree with the Wall Street Journal's assessment of where financial risk lies, and where else do you think they should be looking?
Well, I guess in their specific instances, sure, why not? These might be the flashpoints within the economy that create another big economic problem. But I think overall, these are all like heads of the same hydra, which is debt. Debt anywhere in the system eventually blows everything up, especially if it gets too large. It doesn't really matter where you hide the debt in the system. Usually ends up being paid by the people, though. I was reading a while back about some interesting research on debt over different periods of American history, and they identified like several different kinds of debt. There's like household debt, business debt, there's like banking and financial system debt, and then there's government debt. And it doesn't really matter, again, where you put the debt in any of those four places. Eventually, people, the average person, pays the price, whether it's through inflation or businesses going belly up, real estate crashes, governments going, full-blown money printing mode to pay off unsustainable debt. It doesn't really matter where the debt is. So, to me, shadow banking or insured bank deposits, these are all just forms of debt, so look at the businesses with all these commercial real estate assets. It wouldn't really matter if they hadn't borrowed money to buy something and then lost money on the investment, but haven't realized the loss yet. So my position is that we've just run up way too much debt, and everywhere in the system you look, debt is at near record levels, whether it's government debt, private sector debt, household debt, banking and financial system debt. I mean, debt is everywhere, and it's at unbelievably high levels. The only times we've seen debt at these kinds of levels have been like the Civil War, World War II, that kind of stuff. So eventually we're going to have to pay the price for all that. I guess these might be the trigger points, but something's going to have to give at some point.
I think Alex said it well. I don't have too much to add, except I think that bank deposits out of those three are probably the most safe or the less risky, because with commercial real estate and shadow banking, basically you have unlimited risk, whereas with fractional reserve lending, at least you're subject to those lending ratios. But if you're leveraged up to the eyeballs, if you carry a lot of debt, then when the tide goes in, you could be swimming naked, and that's the biggest risk right there. So yeah, all three of those are risky areas.
I guess I'm a little bit confused on risk to who. If I have no debt, but the entire banking system is predicated on excessive debt, and the whole world comes crumbling down around my ears to the point where I can't get an airline flight, and my grocer doesn't have groceries in their aisles, and there's no gasoline at the tanks. I'd say I'm at risk even if I'm debt free. So I'd have to say that I think our banking situation, where the regulators essentially don't regulate their friends and they overregulate their political enemies, I think we have a banking system that is certainly risky to the entire economy. As far as commercial real estate and private equity lending, quite frankly, is that, hey, those people are, for the most part, are accredited investors. By definition, they're supposed to know better. So, hey, caveat emptor. If you lose your money, then you only individually are hurt. But when the banking system, which all banks are required to be part of the central banking system by law, we're all kind of tied into it, even if we don't want to participate.
It's kind of like going to the doctor for pink eye. Most people, whether you have a medical degree or not, can diagnose pink eye. And that's basically what this article did. It's like, there are risks in these areas, and everybody's like, yeah, we know. It's no surprise to people that there's been risk in these areas. And lots of people, including the Federal Reserve, have been pointing it out for almost 5 years now. And it's shocking that, banks were not as concerned about it or buying the things that they were. And it's also shocking that nobody wanted to go in and reevaluate the rules they use to stress test banks, because like we've been talking about, 30-year treasury was considered safe. And it's like, as interest rates are rising, you'd think the really smart people that are in charge of this would maybe see banks piling money into these long-term treasury bills and think that might cause a little bit of a risk to them. So, I mean, I think that, yeah, they hit the nail on the head. There is financial risk in these areas, but that's not saying a whole lot. And the biggest question is, what else are we not paying attention to? Is it auto loan debt? Is it commercial real estate, which I think I guess was mentioned in that article? Where's the one we're not paying attention to? That's the big one. And if the Wall Street Journal could tell you that, it would be a useful article. Otherwise, they basically just summarized what's been going on, and I think most people know about. All right, so Amazon is unveiling its own palm recognition technology today that will be used to initially turn your hand into a personal credit card inside the company's physical retail stores. Amazon One uses the palm of your hand to identify you using a combination of surface area details like lines and ridges, along with vein patterns to create a palm signature. Panera Bread CEO, Panera Bread, said that it plans to adopt Amazon One in up to 20 of its stores. Do you think you'll be using Amazon One?
No, not a chance. Definitely not.
No, I'm not going to use it either. It's not something I'm into, but I kind of like the idea of not having to carry around a credit card. I don't know. It seems to be tied to a credit card, but I don't know if this would help at all with identity theft, people taking your card and spending it. If it's just your palm, I can't imagine someone would hold your palm, and make you buy something for them, or chop off your hand and use your palm to go buy something. So I think there might be some safety measures by using your own palm, identity theft wise. But am I going to use it? No, I don't think so.
I don't see myself rushing out to embrace that particular form of technology. Who knows, in 5 or 10 years, we may be forced to use that sort of technology, but I don't think I'm going to do it with my consent at this particular time.
I have not signed up for Amazon One, but anytime I had to take, all of the securities exams I had to take, the CFP, you have to go to the Praxis like testing centers or whatever when you actually take your test, and they scan your palm, the palm of your hand. So they take an initial scan to actually determine what your palm looks like, and then when you go back in to take the test, they scan your palm again to make sure you're the person taking your test. So, Praxis, the testing company, already has my palm details. So I guess I've already done this to some degree. And you don't have any option. I mean, maybe other testing companies have something different, but if you're going to take one for some of the financial securities exams, you have to give them your palm information. So I guess I've already done it, but I'm probably not going to sign up for Amazon One anytime soon.
I'll use a little bit more of my time on this one, just because I have some. But I think that Amazon's onto something, because what they're doing is they're removing the friction between having something and or not having something and buying something, and that's what that's going to change the whole consumer behavior. If you can now just buy a soda with a swipe of your hand, I think you're going to sell a whole lot more sodas. I think people are going to spend a whole lot more money. So I think that marketing wise, it's pretty genius. And if they can get people on board, they're going to do pretty well.
So the Robusta coffee bean is making a comeback after years of hiding in the shadows of the Arabica bean, which is used by almost every coffee supplier and coffee country in the country. Some wonder, though, if this is a push by Big Coffee to get people to like a cheaper bean that is easier to grow. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's probably more of what it is. It's typically used, this particular bean, in like the really cheap bulk stuff that you can buy, like those old tin cans full of espresso that your grandparents had for 30 years. That's that kind of coffee. But in addition, I did read something interesting about this, that Vietnamese restaurants and coffee shops are pushing for it because it's Vietnam's #1 bean. And in Vietnam, they use that bean to make Vietnamese coffees, but nobody else in the world uses that bean. So Vietnamese coffee producers want to sell their product for authentic Vietnamese coffee. So I think from that standpoint, it's interesting. Most of the rest, it just sounds like big companies probably want to cut more expensive Arabica beans with a cheaper bean.
I messed up the clock there. I was actually pretty excited to read this article. I thought that Robusta coffee might turn the whole coffee industry on its head by guilting farmers and consumers into producing and drinking more Robusta coffee and less Arabica coffee, based on how it impacts climate change. I think it would be a really interesting social study on consumer behavior and also on the tragedy of the commons, because you'd have people put in this position where, okay, you have to drink environmentally friendly coffee, otherwise you're a hypocrite. And we'd see how many people would actually make the switch despite the differences in taste. But I read a few more articles, and I guess neither coffee has a big impact on climate change. Neither coffee is bad for the environment, but rather Robusta coffee is just positioned to grow better in a warmer climate, or the direction that the climate is changing, a warmer globe. So in that sense, it might force farmers to produce more Robusta coffee just because that's what they can grow. They can grow it in lower areas, because the warmer the globe goes, the higher you have to grow Arabica coffee. But Robusta has higher yields. It's less disease ridden. It's easier to grow. It has more caffeine. So I think if people embrace Robusta and they find a way to make it taste better, then I think it will replace Arabica someday.
I'm not old enough to drink coffee, so to be honest with you, I couldn't tell a good cup of coffee from a bad cup of coffee. Certainly couldn't tell the difference between a good coffee bean and a bad coffee bean. So I'm just going to assume, as a cynic, that the reason they're doing this is to try to get the market to believe they're drinking a good cup of coffee for a cheaper bean.
Yeah, part of me agrees with Joe. I feel like if you dress it up, you make it fancy, and you're like, this is great coffee. Other people might be like, you know what? It is. But I don't know. I'd have to try it, because if it really is as bad as some people have said, some people say it tastes pretty bad, kind of like petrol or something like that. I mean, at some point, people are just gonna be like, you know what, this is actually pretty terrible. And the longer I haven't been drinking coffee that long, but the longer I drink it, the more and more I can tell a good cup from a bad cup. Like, I used to not be able to taste burnt coffee because it all tastes burnt to me anyways. But now, after like 2 years of actually drinking coffee, I can tell like a good cup from a bad cup. And so I'm not saying I've never tried Robusta, but I may be able to tell the difference at this point. And if it's like super bitter, I probably would not like it. So I think that I think the intentions are honest, trying to get a different bean out there, because I wasn't even aware there was more than one. So. All right. So Blockbuster Video used. So the Blockbuster Video you used to visit, with the videotapes. I'm sure everybody knows what Blockbuster is. The brand's website has been showing signs of potential life. People recently noticed that a message greets you when you visit the Blockbuster website, and it says, "We are working on rewinding your movie." Discussion around the message has ranged from people wondering if a potential comeback is in the works. What do you think?
As far as Blockbuster coming back, I would doubt it at a large scale. First of all, you've got the problem of fewer and fewer people have physical media players anymore. Everyone's increasingly gone streaming. So ask yourself, how many people bought a Blu-ray player in the last decade if it wasn't already built into like a video game console? The answer is not that many. But I think there might be just enough time to have passed for all the hate that people used to have for Blockbuster for their fees and policies to have waned. And there's just enough nostalgia that in a few places you might be able to get some video stores to be viable, maybe around college campuses, that kind of stuff. People looking back on their childhood, going to the video store, renting movies with their dad or whatever, maybe they're going to look to, I'm about out of time. So in that sense, I think it might come back.
I'm out of time. Go for it.
Oh.
Blockbuster is never coming back. It's gone.
Yeah, I guess my question would be why? Is that there's so many in the industry right now, and Blockbuster is going to come in. Like, you're not going to win. So I guess I would just say don't do it. Unless you have some revolutionary idea, don't do it. All right, well, that's it for episode 76 of Farm to Markets. Joe is our winner for today. And like I said, you get nothing. So congratulations. So other than that, we'll see you next week.